This is our top story on ABC News Breakfast today. The opposition leader Tony Abbott has rejected the federal government's compromise on asylum seekers. The government has caved into the opposition demands to send asylum seekers to Nauru, but it still wants to keep its Malaysia swap deal. But Mr Abbott says unless temporary protection visas are reintroduced and Malaysia is abandoned, he will not accept the deal. To get the government's reaction to that response this morning, Immigration Minister Chris Bowen joins us now from Sydney. Chris Bowen, good morning and thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Virginia. Good morning to you. Before
we go through exactly what compromise deal and position you've come to, we do have that response this morning from Tony Abbott saying that temporary protection visas have to be part of the deal. Also, his plan to turn boats around and that Malaysia is not acceptable to him. What's your response?
Well, today's the test for Mr Abbott. I mean, I've seen those comments. We're having a meeting today between the government and the opposition. The test is whether they're fair dinkum and will come to the table in good faith. If they're going to start ruling things out like that, then that is not a sign of good faith. If he says no to this deal, he's saying no to Nauru, and it will just show very clearly that he will do anything, take politics to new lows, in order to politic around very serious issues in the national interest. Now, we have, in the spirit of compromise, reached out to the opposition. Prime Minister wrote to Tony Abbott 9 days ago and said, why don't we get together and sort these issues through? He rejected that. He said he wanted a written proposal. We said we wanted everything on the table. He said, no, I want a written proposal. We've put a written proposal on the table and now he's rejecting that, it seems, from this morning's comments. But I do want to say, Virginia, we're having a meeting later in the day. I think that Mr Morrison is a man of good faith and that he and I would be able to sort the issues through if he is allowed to by his party and by his leader.
But if Tony Abbott, at this very, very early stage, so early this morning and just after receiving this letter, is ruling out certain things and insisting on others, is there really any compromise to be reached here?
Well, we'll have to see, Virginia. I think there is. I think we have shown a great spirit of compromise. We have shown, the Prime Minister and the government have shown a real willingness to work these issues through. It's very risky for us and, not political orthodoxy to say, OK, well, let's put Nauru on the table. But we'll do so because we think that's what's necessary to get this done. The Australian people want to see people not dying at sea to get to Australia. We want the same thing. The Labor Party and the Liberal Party believe in offshore processing. Now, unless the Liberal Party comes to the table in good faith, then they will be acting in their own political interest and not the national interest. People will be able to conclude that Tony Abbott's made the decision that boat arrivals are in his best political interest, despite all the negative implications of boat arrivals, despite the dangers of people taking that boat journey, despite people missing out on being settled in Australia from refugee camps around the world. This is the test for Mr Abbott. Today he has the chance to show leadership and to work with the government, or he can just continue the negative, no consistency that he's shown up until now.
Chris Bowen, you've just said that this is a risk for the government, and it is, because Nauru is an option that you've never supported. You've always rejected it, and now, in the words of Wayne Swan, it's one that you actually don't even believe will work. That's the phrase that's used in the letter to Tony Abbott. So why on earth are you considering reopening it?
Well, this is very important, Virginia. It's a legitimate question and it's a very important point. We do not believe that Nauru by itself is anywhere near a deterrent. Just a detention centre at Nauru is not a deterrent. It is Christmas Island, further away and more expensive. The people processed on Nauru, if they're found to be refugees, will be transferred to Australia. It's not a deterrent at all. Having said that, we've said all along that we need the agreement with Malaysia, which is a very effective deterrent, and that you'd need an offshore processing centre as a complement to that, to work with the Malaysia agreement. If there's people, for whatever reason, you don't send to Malaysia, so you have a suite of options available to you. We've negotiated that detention facility for Manus Island and Papua New Guinea. Now, if there's another one in addition to that on Nauru, that can be a useful complement to the Malaysia agreement. But it must be just that, a complement to Malaysia. Just having the Tony Abbott position where he says, well, look, if you've got Nauru, you don't need Malaysia, he's just wrong about that. All the expert advice tells us that. And unless Mr Abbott can come out today, and maybe he will, and say, look, if you've got a detention centre at Nauru, I've negotiated with country X so that the people who are found to be refugees on Nauru get taken to that country, well, that that would be a step forward. But he's not done that. He can't do that. The Howard government, of course, said when they were in office, we'll send you to Nauru and you won't come to Australia, we'll send you somewhere else. And it never happened. They weren't able to negotiate that. A small number of people were transferred to other countries, but the vast majority of refugees were transferred to Australia and New Zealand, so it is no deterrent by itself. But
that's right, and I guess that's why it strikes so many people, including me this morning, as just an extraordinary thing to suggest. And by your own words this morning, it's what, a meaningless and expensive compromise. It won't work. It won't be a deterrent. It'll cost a whole lot of money, but you'll do it anyway. I mean, I just don't see how you can make the argument.
Well, Virginia, there's 2 points. There's 2 points, as I say. Firstly, it would need to be a complement to Malaysia. It would need to be part of the suite of measures.
A terribly expensive complement that would end up, as you say, with those people ending up in Australia anyway.
If we have a proper system in place which stops boat arrivals, then it will then you can save all the money that goes into managing the detention network, that managing onshore processing. Now, as I agree with you in this point, Nauru by itself would be an expensive white elephant, but Nauru, as a complement to our agreement with Malaysia, will be part of a properly negotiated regional response. But it must be that, and it is in the spirit of compromise. We are saying to the opposition, we are prepared to give you what is the fundamental centrepiece of your policy, but we insist on the fundamental centrepiece of ours. I think the Australian people are saying to us, get this sorted, compromise, sort it through. We've shown a great spirit of willingness to do so. Mr Abbott hasn't shown any so far, but maybe today, just maybe today, he'll authorise Mr Morrison to do so.
Would you compromise on the reintroduction of temporary protection visas?
Well, look, our position is that we don't believe that they work and that they are not an effective deterrent at all. We saw last time the number of people arriving on boats go up because temporary protection visas removed family reunions. So people came to Australia and then contacted their family members and said, look, sorry, I thought I could sponsor you, but I can't. You're going to have to get on the boat. Now, we'll talk all these issues through with the Liberal Party today. No doubt they'll have an alternative view to put, and I'll hear their case. And I will attempt in good faith to come to a conclusion with them. But we've put the offer on the table. As I said, our preferred position was that we have no parameters to the discussion, no limits to the discussion, and we come to a joint position. Tony Abbott said no to that. He wanted a written proposal. Well, now he's got one. The time for excuses is over. Every excuse that Mr Abbott has ever put up is now gone. Either he believes in offshore processing or he doesn't. Either he wants to stop people dying on the seas to get to Australia or he doesn't. They're the choices today for Mr Abbott.
Chris Bowen, I wonder what you see as the moral position here. If you go ahead with this compromise deal, if you do manage to get some kind of compromise that includes Nauru, maybe Malaysia, maybe not, but in the Nauru instance, you take people, possibly even illegally, from Christmas Island and transfer them to an island state thousands of nautical miles from nowhere against their will, where they're isolated for possibly years on end while their claims are processed, as happened last time. And then, as you say this morning, and experience tells us, they end up in Australia anyway. Where does that leave the moral position of the federal government when it comes to our obligation to people who do have a legal right to seek asylum in this country?
Well, I'll make a couple of points there. Firstly, Virginia, of course, a lot depends on the arrangements you put in place, whether it's Nauru or Papua New Guinea or Malaysia or anywhere else, the arrangements you put in place to ensure people are treated appropriately and where the detention centre is not the particularly relevant point. It's how it's run and what arrangements are put in place for people's claims to be processed. The second point I make is this, Virginia. I make it very clearly and strongly. The objective of our policy, my objective as Immigration Minister, is to run a refugee policy which lifts the maximum number of people out of misery. I want more refugees coming to Australia. I want to give more people the chance of a better life in Australia. If we implement the Malaysia Agreement, that's an increase of 1,000 refugees into Australia a year automatically. As I moved at the Labor Party National Conference, then I'd like to move it over time to 20,000 refugees a year. That would make us the second largest resettlement country in the world. We're currently the third largest. We take more refugees than any other country bar Canada and the United States. Moving to 20,000 would move us into being the second largest resettlement country in the world. If I can do that over time, I'll be very proud of that. But I also want to do it in a way which means you don't say to people, your best chance of a better life in Australia is to risk your life to get here. It is unsustainable and not morally acceptable to me.
Chris Bowen, good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Virginia.